Sacred Sites with Steve Ray, here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
Good morning, Keith. Always glad to join you. I sent you over a bunch of pictures today of the site. One of them there is with my daughter 30 years ago at Caesarea Philippi. She was about 8 years old. Now she's got 5 kids. So, I've been there over 100 times since then. And, I'm a little overwhelmed to do this because normally when I take my group there, I've got 2 hours at the site. And I explain to them, we crawl up on the rocks, we go, it's a little overwhelming, but I'm not going to rush through it, even if it takes a couple of weeks, because this is one of my favorite sites in the Holy Land, and it's very cool. And it's just so cool to go there. I'm going to try and make it come alive for people with my words, if I can do that. So we're going to get right into this. I'm going to read Matthew 16:15. Now, Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi and asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" We can now change it to say, Steve Ray and his group of Guadalupe pilgrims have arrived in Caesarea Philippi. And Jesus says, why did he ask them this question there? Well, first of all, when we get there, we have been on the bus for about an hour and 15 minutes, air-conditioned Mercedes bus, very comfortable. Jesus and his guys walked from the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee all the way up there, and it's into very pagan territory. Jews stayed away from pagan places, so why would he go there? Because Jesus was a good teacher. And good teachers love to show things. They love backdrops. They love to. My favorite class in school was show and tell, because there you could, it was all about showing things and telling things and so on. And Jesus went up there because of the backdrop. So because it was a pagan site, Jesus would have gone, I don't think, right up to it, because this is where they were worshiping pagan idols, making human sacrifices. I've heard human sacrifices, but at least living sacrifices to these ancient pagan gods. So I think Jesus would have stood back a ways and use this as a backdrop. Kind of like if I'm going to talk about liberty and justice, where would I go? I'd go to New York, and I would stand with the Statue of Liberty over my shoulder, because that Statue of Liberty is going to say as much as my words do, the backdrop of a Statue of Liberty. So Jesus went there, and this was his backdrop, and he asked them the first question. He says, "Who do men say that I am?" Now, I want to just quickly, as we walk into the site, you see the huge rock. There's a cave in it. There's niches in the wall. There's a stream coming out from under this big, huge rock, which is like 500 feet, 50 feet. It's part of the Mount Hermon range. And so first thing we got to do is get our seats, because there's a lot of people there. There aren't right now, by the way. If you want to go with me on December 28th, I'm going to this place in December, and you can come with us. It's our first time back. We're excited. So we walk in, we get our seats. There's a little stone theater there, and we sit there, and I explain to them, because you can see it while I'm talking, and all of a sudden you can see people's eyes going, oh my goodness, this site is so cool. So I want to talk first about the rock, the name Peter, the cave, the temple, the sacrifices, the stream, the niches, and the keys. Now, we can do that easy in 7 minutes. I got that left. But we'll get started. So Jesus asked him, "Who do men say that I am?" And they said, "We don't know. The editorial in the newspapers are full of speculation. You may be John the Baptist, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. Nobody knows, Jesus, who you are. But the messianic fevers, like even cut the air. It's so thick. Nobody knows who you are." And Jesus said, "Then who do you say that I am?" And Peter blurts it out. He doesn't always get it right, but he blurts out, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus smiles and he says, "Thank you, Peter. You just defined me. Now I'm going to return the favor, and I'm going to define you. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." See, there's an exchange of favors going on here of identifying who the other is. But Jesus also said that didn't come from the gray matter between your ears, Peter. As Simon was his name up till then, that didn't come from your head. That came from my Father who's in heaven. That was a divine revelation to you, which is already setting up the stage for what Peter is going to be, who he's going to be, and how Jesus is going to use him in his church. He's getting revelations from God, and this is very important. So he says, thank you. You defined me, and I'm going to define you now. I'm going to return the favor. You are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church. That, when we hear that at Mass, it just goes in one ear and out the other. Boom, and it just goes right in. You need a fish hook kind of to catch in your brain and stop and say, wait a minute. What did Jesus just say? What did Peter just say? What does that mean? Well, first of all, in English, we're at a great disadvantage because when we're reading the Bible in English, we don't get the nuances, the word plays, the important Greek words and Aramaic, because Jesus didn't speak Greek. He spoke Aramaic. So we're 3 languages removed. And when you try to translate that, it's tough. So we say, you are Peter and on this rock. So what? We don't see any connection. But if you heard it in Greek, it would say, you are Petros. And on this Petra, I will build my church. So you see all of a sudden a word play between Petros and Petra. So why didn't Jesus say you are Petra? Because that's the Greek word for rock. He could have said, you are Petra, and on this Petra, I will build my church. And when I was a Baptist, I used to say, gotcha, Catholics. See, it's 2 different words. It's Petros and Petra, and you got it wrong. Jesus didn't name him rock. He named him Petros, which is something else. Well, why did Jesus name him Petros? Because when I'm with my groups and we're all sitting there, I said, how many people speak Spanish? And about, there's always 5, 10, 15 people raise their hand. I said, tell me about your nouns. A thing, a tree, a rock, a bird. They said they're all masculine or feminine. They either have a masculine or feminine. I said, now in Greek, it's the same way. And the word Petra for rock is feminine. Jesus can't call Peter Petra. It's a feminine noun. You'd go and introduce him. I'd like to introduce you to my friend Petra. You just can't do that. So he has to make it a masculine name. So what he does is he creates a new word, a new name. He takes Petra, the feminine, and he puts a masculine ending on it, os. So now it's Petros, and now it's a play off the word rock. It is the word rock, but it's a masculine ending. So now he can go and say, this is my friend Petros, and everybody will say, oh, good, nice name. Nobody had ever been named that before. But Jesus didn't use Greek. We say Petros and Petra, but Jesus wasn't speaking Greek. He's speaking Aramaic, which is the language of their day. Matthew, when he wrote the gospel, had to translate what Jesus said in Aramaic, and he had to translate it into Greek so that we could read the New Testament in Greek, which is the language it was in. In Aramaic, the word rock is Kepha. It's not Petros, Petra, it's Kepha, and there's no masculine or feminine there. It is just Kepha. You are rock. And I know that's the case, Keith, because in John chapter 1, verse 42, where Jesus first met Peter for the first time, he said, oh, nice to meet you, Simon. Your new name will be Kepha. And then John puts in parentheses, which means rock. So Jesus knew he was going to change Peter's name from Simon to Petros or Kepha from the very beginning. And when Paul refers to Peter throughout his Gospels, he refers to him as Cephas, the rock. I went up to Jerusalem to see the rock, Cephas, Kepha, same word. So this is why the name changed. Now, so we go from the name to the rock. Why does Jesus decide to call him rock here? Because it's a big backdrop. You're looking at a huge rock. It's 500 feet long and 50 feet high and a big cave in it. So all of a sudden, here is the rock, and Peter's getting named the rock. So there's a correlation here. See the backdrop. Jesus is already starting. And he says, then there's the cave. Now, this is interesting because in that cave, there used to be water and there was no bottom to it. And that in the book of Josephus, he's a writer in the first century, he said, we used to take a string and tie a rock on it and drop it down, down, down into the water, and we could never find the bottom of it. And so the ancients and the pagans and all the people that came there used to call it the entrance to hell. It was the gates down there. The gods lived down there. The dead lived down there. It was the gates of Hades. In fact, when you read in Matthew 16, in the Greek, it doesn't say the gates of hell. It says the gates of Hades, which is the place of the dead. So the pagans called that one of the entrances into the netherworld down below where the Hades, the dead, lived, and the gods. And they said, if you throw your sacrifices into the water, living sacrifices, that the gods down below will receive them. But then you'd come running out because there's a stream coming out from under there. And if there's blood coming out in the water, that means the gods had rejected your sacrifice. But if there's no blood in the water coming out, you know that down under below, they had accepted your sacrifice. It's the exact opposite in Christianity. Without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. So my time is up. I wish I had 2 hours like I do there, but we at least got to the location. We got a view of what it looks like. We've touched on the name and the cave, but in front of the cave, there's a big temple, and we'll start there next week.
Sacred Sites with Steve Ray is heard live every Monday on the Guadalupe Radio Network program Morning Joy, hosted by Keith Downey. For more authentic Catholic content, go to grnonline.com/joy.